And so the art of building was another really prominent book for the Renaissance men and for their manifestos, was The Art of Building by Leon Battista Alberti. And he drew a lot off of Vitruvius's ideas, but he also synthesized a lot of new ideas that were circulating around at the time. And he wrote a lot of just, here's some ideas of how to build your buildings far superior than anything that was built before. And I'm not saying that these buildings surpass the Gothic architecture, because if you look at some of the Gothic architecture buildings, they have their own theories, and they're monumental in their own right. And there's a good case to be made that the Gothic architecture was some of the best architecture, if not the best architecture that was ever created. But nevertheless, there was something very special that was happening around the time of the Renaissance, where their buildings were being able to be made with much more precision than all of the other secular buildings that were made at the time. It's like most of the buildings that were made in the Dark Ages were just religious buildings, but now they're even able to apply these principles to secular buildings. But if we go to the churches and we go to what all the churches were built for, like we talked about before, like the church is a place where you go learn about the immutable principles of nature, whether it be a Christian church or a pagan church or whatever. Essentially, they're trying to distill the information of the universe and impart that in a practical, functional way to the individual. This is what the university is. It teaches you how the universe works. And if you go to a lot of these Renaissance churches, they'll have all of these weird alignments. Like most of the churches, even in the East and the West, they all align towards the East. The sun rises in the East. To reorient means the orient is the East. It means to face the East. So to reorient, to put yourself in the proper orientation, means to face the place where the light comes from. They would have these little, I remember on the Florence Cathedral, whenever I visited that, they would have like these weird little timekeeping devices out there where you would go and it would have like these weird mechanical things where the sunlight would shine, and at different parts of the year, it would match different lines so it could keep track. It would keep track of the movements of the stars, of the seasons passing, of the days of the week. The churches were able to basically keep the time for everybody. They were able to keep the time not just on a day-to-day, but on a truly cosmic scale. And then on certain parts of the year, the sun would shine and hit certain paintings. So it's like this feast day is on this particular day, and we have a painting that represents that particular feast, and the sun will shine through the window and hit that particular area and light up that painting on that feast day. Like the whole entire building was built to specifically tell a story and to bring out all of these principles of the universe into a way that we're still trying to understand how they did it today. Like, for example, there was this study that they did where, I don't know if you may have heard of, that if you take water or sand and you put it on top of a speaker and you play a certain sound, a certain frequency, it makes geometric patterns in the water or in the sand through different frequencies. And so like the sound has like a geometric pattern to it. And so they went and they found that buildings just have a natural resonance to them. So you would have, one particular church, and you would go to that church and you would have no sound on, and you would go record it. And this is like in the 90s, they would go record all of these churches, just the ambient sound in the church. And they would find each church had a unique frequency. And then they went and they took that frequency and they played it on those speakers. I forget what that particular instrument is called, but they would play it on those speakers, and the pattern that it would make in the sand or in the water would be the same geometric pattern that was on their rose window, that was on their main stained glass window. And each stained glass window was different, the same way each natural resonance, ambient resonance of each church was different, and they all matched up perfectly. So like this church had a particular stained glass window and a particular resonance, and they matched up perfectly geometrically. We don't understand how they did it. Like, they were so advanced. Not all this stuff got saved. Not all this stuff was able to be written down and preserved. So we're still trying to understand. So the idea that we're the most advanced species in the world, yes. Are we in the most advanced time in the world? In some ways, yes, but in other ways, not. We've lost the synthesis of the polymath. We've lost the being able to incorporate music and geometry and pattern and all of this into every single thing that we do. Some of the top of the most elite have access to this information, but the general population is just totally unaware of this. And so here's some quotes from Leon Battista Alberti's book on the art of learning that really explain in a nutshell what the idea of the Renaissance man is. He says, "Let the architect be a man of learning, skilled in geometry, history, philosophy, and the arts. For no work can be perfect unless it proceeds from a mind enriched from many disciplines. The city, like a great house, and the house in turn like a small city, both must be planned with care to serve the needs of their inhabitants and reflect their dignity. So once again, there's always this microcosm, macrocosm connection that they have. They would see that, in Genesis, they talk about man is made in the image of God and God is the creator of the universe. There was this, you talk about the Vitruvian man, that famous picture of Leonardo da Vinci of the man with the two sets of arms and the two sets of legs and the circle is squared and all that. He was showing that there's a principle of proportion in the human body that resonates throughout the rest of nature. And that this is actually somehow, this principle is applicable to the way our buildings are proportioned. And so this is a common thing in the Renaissance, is whenever you build these big public buildings and you build these monumental structures, they were supposed to be in a proper proportion to the human body. And they were supposed to have, and this is why if you look at the church, the shapes of all these cathedrals, they were built like a cross. And so when you look at them from outer space, they actually look like a cross. And then you stand there at the center of the cross. And they would understand there was all of these different rocks that have different types of vibrations. And you would stand on one particular rock whenever you go to take the communion, the Eucharist, and that rock would have a particular vibration. And so you'd have the church, which has this particular resonance, and then you'd have the rocks that you stand on that enhance that frequency and that vibration. I mean, we sometimes people think that this rock having vibration thing, it may be a little far stretched, but I mean, think about how watches work with the quartz. There is like a natural electrical energy that's held inside of the rocks that they knew about then, and they found ways to apply that into the building. And then you have the music dropping down on your head from the top. And you would have the way that these pipe organs and the choirs, the sound would go up and circulate throughout the building and fall down right on your head. And you'd be standing there and the light would coming through at the perfect time of the day. And then it's like this magical experience where all of these mysteries could be conveyed to you in a moment through this ritual process. And you're not even able to quite articulate all of the information that's being conveyed to you, but somehow the secrets of the universe are all being deeply, like, they're soaking into your being. And you can then carry that with you, and then that elevates the rest of your life. And so they always saw your house is like a small version of the city. Your family is like a small version of the government. So how do you apply all of these? You don't go around telling the government necessarily how to restructure itself. Although that is a part of it, is you go and you vote and you debate and all of that. But you start off with your individual self. You start off with orienting yourself towards the best good that you possibly can. And you start off with setting your house in the best order that you possibly can. And hopefully building a house that's in the proper order. And we need to go back. I mean, the architecture in America today is just absolutely abysmal compared to how beautiful the architecture is. I mean, a lot of the architecture is, I believe, is intentionally made to be ugly. And there's a whole bunch of books and a whole bunch of topics we could go to. That's also for another video about the downfall of art and the downfall of architecture and why why so many of our buildings are so ugly today. But to them, beauty was so important because beauty meant that it's the pattern properly being played out. And you don't really quite understand how to even put that into practice if you don't study this wide range of theories. Because when you start to study these, not even theories, that's the wrong word for it. When you study this wide range of subject matter, because then when you start to study it, then you see the interconnectedness to it. You say, hey, this is true across this, and it's true into this field, and it's true into this field. And then the more fields you see that, hey, this is true on all of these fields, then the more true it becomes. If it's only relevant, if your theory is only relevant in one particular field of study, then it's not that strong of a theory. But if you have a principle and you say, look, this principle is relevant in music, it's relevant in math, it's relevant in geometry, and it also somehow it even shows the pattern of history of the rise and the fall of nations. That there's the pattern, and it's somehow aligned with the stars and the way that they move across, and all the heavenly bodies move, and it's somehow in alignment with the way that the plants spiral up and the leaves. They have a natural pattern where they go with the Fibonacci sequence, and they capture the perfect amount of sunlight, where if they were 1 degree off, the leaves would block the other leaves and they would get less sunlight. Or if they were 1 degree off the other way, there'd be too much of a gap and they'd be wasting sunlight. So everything falls under that pattern, that Fibonacci sequence. And so when you would say, look, it's relevant across every single domain we could possibly study, then that is a much, much higher version of truth than something that's just only relevant in one field. So this is the reason for that polymath Renaissance men type ideal, is you want to have as wide of a field of study you can. And you don't really get to choose your interest. Your interests kind of choose you. So it wasn't like I'm going to force myself to study things I'm not interested in. But it's like, hey, if you're interested in a particular thing that's maybe outside of your main channel of work, by all means, go study that. Because the things you could learn from that, you could return back to center. You could tie that back into your practice, and it'll actually make it better. You go learn from these foreign concepts, and you go bring them back into your localized concepts, and it'll actually improve, and it'll make your practice far better than what it ever could possibly be on its own. And so in order to start rebuilding and saving America, we need to get out of our specialization mind. We need to get into the entrepreneur mind of the Renaissance man, of let's not just say we're going to pick one thing to do and just do that. Let's have an adventure. Let's go explore. Let's first find out what are the immutable principles of nature, and then explore all the different possible fields we can and figure out how to apply them all into this one particular thing I'm working on. And you just watch. If you start to do that, watch the quality of your work just rise and rise and rise. I've noticed this particularly. I mean, painting is my main field. And so the more I learn about music, the more I see the colors combined into a painting as notes combining to make a different chord. And you start to see these patterns, and you start to notice all different types of ways to look at your work, whereas it's like this refreshment of nuance that wasn't there before, where it makes the work relevant across much more fields than like, oh, this is just a pretty picture. Like the picture has a deep resonance. There's a depth and a meaning and a harmony to it all, where when you look at it, you just go, oh, there's something about that that's just amazing. And every time you look at that painting, you'll get more and more and more value. It's not something that you just look at like a pop song today. A pop song could be really catchy, and then you could listen to it, but there's no deep truth that's embedded into it. And then so that when the next trend comes around, that pop song dies out. In the musical genres today, it's like they're cool for a decade, and then maybe they come back a decade later, and then they're gone, and they come back. But if you look at like a work of Bach, or a work of Mozart, or like these classical musicians, their work is going to be indefinitely valuable. There's always going to be value to pull off of. And they even did a study with this where they took plants and they played different types of music, and they put like heavy hard rock music and rap music and stuff like that, and the plants started to die and wither, and they actually grew away from the speaker. And they played Bach and Mozart and all of that, and Handel. I think Bach and Handel were the two musicians where the plants actually thrived when they grew the most, and they grew and they wrapped around the speakers, because like the music itself mirrored just the movement of everything in nature and the absolute harmony of the universe. And it doesn't actually even have to be complex. If you look at the old Gregorian chants, it was based off of, it was just people singing. It wasn't like 50 instruments all together in this big orchestra. It was just like, you could just have one person moving their voice up and down, but because of how sacred the patterns are, that somehow that music is just still some of the most peaceful, healing, beautiful music you could possibly find. So it's not even necessarily a matter of complexity. Sometimes the most beautiful things could be taking all this complexity and distilling it down to something very simple. And so this really leads into the next idea, is with this polymath Renaissance men, you get this idea of the ultimate goal is improving the craftsmanship, improving the quality of the craftsmanship, and improving the artistry.